well, let me introduce this evening Dr. Bruce Kingsbury. He is, of course, a professor of biology here at Purdue, and he is graduated, pardon me, my voice is not doing very well. He graduated from Pomona College in California, right? Okay, with his bachelor's, San Diego State University for his master's, and the University of California for his PhD. So we consider him well qualified, right? Okay. His areas of interest, of course, are endangered reptiles, and that's where his passion is, as you'll notice this evening. You're going to enjoy this thoroughly. So Dr. Kingsbury. Okay.
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so that's me. So I won't introduce what I do at all. If for some reason you're interested in that, hi John, that I have a website. You can find it on the websites that I'm going to show you here in a second. And I'm always compelled with new folks to show them a little bit about the ERC, but I also know that some of you have seen all this before. How many of you have seen me talk before? Oh, good. Not too many. That's awesome. How many of you know about the ERC? Same people. All right. Well, good. Fertile ground here. That's awesome. Okay, so I'm the director of the Environmental Resources Center. You are in the Environmental Resources Center, and we welcome you. And the mission of the ERC is to promote the understanding and conservation of natural resources of the region through scientific research, educational opportunities, and community engagement. And I feel like I'm always telling people about this. I'm always stealing 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of a talk, so I try not to do that today, but based on the survey that I just did, maybe I should have. But you never know. But to find out more about the ERC, you can go to our website, and that's just ercpfw.org. That's updated fairly regularly. I'll say a little something about our newsletter that you could sign up for if you want. I have a little trifold brochure here over by the door now that you can pick up and take with you if you want to learn more about us. And really what I thought I would do just for a couple minutes was highlight some of our outreach and engagement that we have coming. And one version of that is on Monday we are going to have a new event. We're calling it Naturally Inspired, and basically what we want to do is just invite people to come here, show their art, and if it's like a painting or something like that, you could bring it in. We'll put it up on an easel. If it's a sculpture, we'll put it on the table. If it's a poem, we'll invite you to read it. And we thought we'd just hang out together. And at 5:24, we're going to toast the vernal equinox. So the main event is roughly from 5 to 7, and I'd love to have any or all of you here, with or without your art. If you actually do want to bring a piece of art, let me know, because I got to figure out how to show it. I don't want any surprises. I'm sure I'll get surprises anyway. So please do consider that. That's on Monday. Another thing that has been a big hit over the years is the conservation conversation. I think it was 2018 we started that. And we had it in the Alumni Center. We filled the Alumni Center. It's like, wow, we can go large with this. So we did. We went over to the International Ballroom, filled that. And next time we were going to go even bigger. And then COVID came. And finally, after stops and starts, we're going to do that again, but we're going to shift it from an Earth Day time slot into the fall so that we don't lose people if it's a nice sunny day. By fall, maybe they'll be ready to come in and listen to talks about the environment and that kind of thing. But that's a big event we have in the fall. Another sort of thing that we do is we don't do a lot of hard copy stuff, but this is our update of the River Walk. If some of you have been on this before, it's a tree walk. It has a lot of native trees labeled, and there's website links to information and stuff like that. So I use that as an example of some of the other stuff that we do. And now people keep asking me about my interpretive dance. And I have been caught doing dances, one of which is called the brachiation, another one is the supination, but I'm worried that tonight my dance will be tripping over this cord. So if that happens, that was my interpretive dance. I did start sending around a sheet to sign up for our newsletter. We sent one out today, but if you sign up, I'll try to figure out how to get you that one. But we do that monthly-ish to keep you updated about what we're doing, things that are happening in the community, or larger topics of interest. And this time we included a poem about a Blandings turtle, and we've highlighted some of our events and a member of our board. So that's a little bit about the ERC. We do all kinds of cool stuff. A lot of what we do is research with not only imperiled reptiles and amphibians, but colleagues like Jordan Marshall is an affiliate. I think he was where's the Dr. Mark Jordan? Mark, what was his topic? Oh, that sounds like Jordan Marshall.
It was.
Oh, okay. Those two guys, the names get confused. One of them's a herpetologist and the other's a botanist. But he's an affiliate. Dr. Mark Jordan is. Dr. Scott Bergeson, who you'll hear from, is an affiliate of the ERC. And so we do a lot of research, provide a lot of opportunities for students. We like to showcase good practice. And so we have some new landscaping that you may have noticed outside that some of the folks in this room have made possible around the ERC, and we're going to continue that around. But we have a dry creek bed that saw full action and was highlighted in the news brief this morning. And we've planted some native landscaping, and we'll continue to expand that. And I guess since I said that, you guys have to do some volunteer activity, and we might be able to help you with that because we are reliant on volunteers. It's not like the university gives us a bunch of money. They keep the lights on. I get a little stipend for what I do, and we have some staff, but otherwise we do fundraising, and we need help. So that's where the volunteers come in. All right, so that's that. And since I blazed through that and you were all very polite, let me also say I welcome interruptions. You'll quickly discover I'm a pretty casual, fun-loving fellow, and so feel free to ask me questions, and I will entertain you as best I am able. Okay, so we're talking about reptiles and amphibians tonight, and so you'll. You know what? Let me see if I can turn down the lights. Is that okay? My pictures will be prettier then. All right. So you'll hear me and others throw around the term herps or herpetofauna, and that prefix will be familiar to you in other ways as well, but it means to crawl. So herpetofauna are animals that crawl, and it's including the amphibians and reptiles, which happen to be fairly closely related to one another, but initially they were considered together because they were in the same area of the museum. They were pickled in formaldehyde together, but they were clearly not fish. And that's how they originally were grouped together. But it turns out that reptiles and other groups are derived from amphibians, and so they actually do go together. So what I want to do, though, is start us off with a little bit of taxonomy and systematics. And what I have here are the groups of amphibians and reptiles, some of which are familiar to you and some of which are not. And one that's I doubt is familiar with you is this thing, which looks like a kind of a dried out earthworm. If we expand from that, from the amphibians come reptiles, which are not, and mammals. Mammals are not reptiles. They don't actually come from reptiles either. Or proto-reptiles maybe. There's a branch that goes off. And then you have other things from the reptiles that are like dinosaurs and birds. So they are derived from reptiles, but they're not reptiles. And so I want to, as my little evolutionary lesson of the day, I want to talk about that a little bit. And what I'd like to focus us on as we go is this notion of a unique derived character. And what I mean by that is that the character, the thing like wings, is unique to the group, and it is derived from something else. So wings came from forelimbs, for example. And when we can find those that are distinct from the group that they came from, then we know that they're related and how they're related to one another. So there's all of these different groups, but really when it comes to Indiana and vicinity, we're talking about salamanders and frogs, turtles, snakes, and lizards. Caecilians are amphibians that actually look a lot like this. I actually have a picture later to show it to you, but they're like in places like Mexico. And then we have turtles. Tuataras are only found in New Zealand. They look a lot like lizards, but they're not. And then there's amphisbaenids. Those are like these guys, and they're actually derived from lizards, as are snakes, by the way. And then we have crocodilians, which also then give rise to birds. And now, curiously, I don't know how far I'll get into this, but I'll mention that turtles have always been rather mysterious, but now it seems like maybe they're more related to things like crocodiles than something like a snake or a lizard. Anyway, my point here is that there's a lot of different groups that we won't talk about because they don't occur around here, but they are out there. Okay, so amphibians. Amphibians have a moist skin and no scales. And that's interesting because they come from one lineage of fish, but not like something like sharks, the cartilaginous fish, which don't have the scales that you might recognize. So by and large, you think about a fish, you think about something with scales, right? You think about something like a lizard, and you think about scales. But in between those are the amphibians that don't have scales. And so I think this is kind of an interesting thing to talk about when we're thinking about unique derived characters. The scales on a fish, the stiff element of the scale on a fish is dermal bone. So we have the epidermis and then the dermis below that in the skin. So the hard part of a scale in a fish is dermal bone from the dermis. The hard part of the scale from a lizard is in the epidermis, and it is not bone. So both of them have scales, but they're actually not the same thing. And in between are amphibians. So the unique thing that they did was they lost the scales. Usually they have moist skin, although anything can have moist skin, so it's kind of not the best, or what we would call a robust character. And they have a larval stage, like a tadpole, that you can see and is outside of the animal, and so it's really apparent, and so probably all of us are familiar with pollywogs and things like that. But it turns out that's not a unique derived character. All these organisms that we're talking about have larval stages. And then they also have unshelled eggs. And I point that out now because later I'll talk about reptiles, and some of them actually have shelled eggs, so they're different.
Wait a second.
Yeah?
I'm not following you. You're saying the larvae are outside of the animal. Could you give me some examples of larvae that are inside the animal?
I can. Humans.
Okay, so the
Mammals,
mammals.
birds would have the larvae, the embryonic stages inside of the egg. But what's kind of odd about this is the egg hatches and the larvae, the early stages are swimming around, whereas in us, they stay inside of us until they develop further. Okay? Okay. So as I alluded to already, there is some sort of tadpole stage in all of these organisms. By the way, another term I'll throw out is tetrapod. That just means having 4 limbs. So all of these guys, including, by the way, snakes, their unique derived feature is that they lost those limbs. But all of these organisms above the fish I'll call tetrapods because of the 4 legs. But everybody has these larval stages. It's just with most species of amphibian, they're right out there for you to see. Things start off with these eggs, and typically, and a lot of times I'm going to have to say, I'll use words like usually or that kind of thing, because these rules turn out to have their own derived violations. Like there are plenty of amphibians, and I will give you one example later, that lay their eggs on land, but almost all of them lay their eggs in water. So that means wherever the adults are, they have to go to a body of water and lay the eggs. And they might be in strands like on a toad, or laid singly in other species. Here's a nice example of a cluster of eggs that are from a salamander around here. And what's interesting about this is this cluster of eggs would fit in my hand like that, but the salamander that laid them is smaller than that. And the reason that's at all possible is that once the eggs are laid in the water, they absorb more water, and so they swell, kind of like tapioca bubbles, if you like bubble tea. I do.
Is that the same with the toad and the frog?
Uh,
also swell?
Yep, yep. But this is pretty dramatic. The larvae, and you only use the term tadpole when you're talking about frog larvae. If you're talking about a salamander larvae, you call it a salamander larvae. And you don't embarrass yourself by using the term pollywog with a salamander larvae. That'd be so not cool. So here's different tadpoles, and all I want you to get from this is that they don't look the same. They have different mouth parts. The mouth and the anus are in different locations. The tail structure is different. If you are an expert tadpole person, which I am not, you can identify most of your tadpoles just by looking at the structures on them. So you could say, oh, that's a bullfrog, or that's a green frog, or something like that. I can't do that. It's too confusing to me. But they're really variable, and that variability has to do with where they live. Most tadpoles are herbivorous, and their parts are for scraping off algae off of rocks or plants or that kind of thing. Some are carnivorous. Some are in moving water, and though they have to have a suction device to stay attached to something so they don't get hauled downstream. So they're really variable. And they are so variable that this is a larvae of a species which is being eaten by a larvae of the same species. So these are both tiger salamander larvae, but this one is what we'd call the carnivorous morph, and this one is the herbivorous morph. And what I would observe about this is that it looks here like it sure would be better to be the carnivorous morph. And in this moment in time, oh, I did this. This is the kind of stuff we're going to show at Naturally Inspired. All right, little plug there for myself. But if, in most circumstances, in a pond, all the eggs were laid at the same time, all of the larvae, therefore, are the same size. If you are a carnivore, it's very difficult to eat something that is the same size as you are. So under those circumstances, it's actually not good to be a carnivore. It's better to be a herbivore because there's always algae to eat. But if you're in a disrupted sort of a situation where you got a jump start on other larvae, then you have a wonderful opportunity to grow like crazy and eat these little guys. And so they're flexible depending on the circumstances.
So you're saying they actually will change more?
Actually, in this situation, once they're down a trajectory of being one or the other, then they won't. But at the very beginning, they can become carnivorous. Good question. Another thing that I'll talk about tonight is the variety of threats that amphibians and reptiles are facing, and at least a third of the species that we know about are threatened in some way, and maybe up to half at this point. This could be due to habitat loss. That's kind of the obvious one, and it's certainly a real important one and may still be the most important one. But you may be also aware now of how there's lots and lots of exotic species we have in our environments, and they are impacting amphibians. Some species are over-collected for food or the pet trade. There's contamination and pollution in many areas, and amphibians are thought to be particularly susceptible to this because of their moist skin that allows a lot of chemicals to pass right across the skin, and disease. And I'll get into that a little bit. I would think of these diseases typically as being an unanticipated form of introduced species. We have diseases moving around largely because of the pet trade, and those are really detrimental.
Because of the what? Because of that?
The animals are not have not evolved defenses to these diseases, and
So what did you call that? Because of
Pet trade.
the pet trade, because of the pet trade. So
oh, the pets.
so you might have something like a fire-bellied toad or newt, and you bring it in, and it turns out that not only did you bring in the newt, but you brought in all the diseases that are in the newt. So one of the takeaways I would like for you to have from tonight is that wetlands are really important, and I'll drive that home in a second. Shallow wetlands, even these wetlands that dry up in summertime, are critical. And almost all of the amphibians and reptiles that are in trouble are reliant on these wetlands, and yet you might not even know that they're there. So I want to show you why. Another problem is that people like to stabilize water levels by putting in a little levee or something like that. And of course, what good is a body of water if it doesn't have fish? So they add fish. Well, it turns out that fish eat the larvae and the eggs. And in pesticides and fertilizers and that kind of stuff run downhill into these bodies of water, and so they get polluted. So we want to try to avoid those things. Connectivity of wetland types with one another turns out to be really important. So it's not just that you go, oh, my forest has one wetland in there, everything's fine. It actually turns out that things are much more interesting the more wetlands there are. And then anticipating that some of you are or will be or know naturalists or people who work in various situations where they have animals on display, I want to get you to think about a few things for that. And one is, I do think that everybody should try to limit how many individual organisms they have on display. And that relates to the rest of these points. And think about, well, a few things. One is if you take an animal out of its environment, even if you let it go, stuff can happen. For one thing, a lot of times people catch an animal in one place and they let it go somewhere else. Well, the first thing that I can tell you happens there, that animal is lost. It knew where it was, you caught it, picked it up, and then you're done with it and you let it go somewhere convenient. It has no idea where it is. And they often get killed right away because they're wandering around looking for something familiar.